Hi everyone who's joining. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to join. We're a little bit early, so we'll just give everyone a minute or two before we get started. Is it really hot in Delhi at the moment?
Yes. Humid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's humid here.
It wasn't that hot when I was growing up, but then we didn't have so many cars or urban emissions either.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
It's nice here as long as it's raining, not outside, but inside. It's like pleasant while it's raining, and then as soon as it stops, the humidity is like...
Oh, not here. Here we have hot wind and hot rain. It's not like nice rain. It's like in your face, burn you and fall on you kind of rain.
At least it's consistent, I suppose. You know?
Yeah, sure. Consistency, lava-like.
Yeah, what you're going for. Hi guys, if you're just joining, we'll start in about a minute or so. If you want to just say hi, let us know that you're here. If we are obviously going to be chatting today with Aanchal Malhotra, we'll introduce in a moment, but if you wanted to text a friend who you know would be interested or a family member, then please do that now just before we get started. And we will be good to go shortly. I have another screen here that I look at for questions in case they're coming up while we chat. So I'm just going to make sure that is functional. Okay, wonderful. Okay.
सुबह जैसे आँख खोली थी आपने सोचा कि चलो चाय वाय का कोई बंदोबस्त करते हैं देखते जैसे आँख खोली इधर भी मुर्दा और मक्खियाँ ऐसी उनके ऊपर कि जैसे कि लेयर ऑफ मक्खियाँ नहीं होती जब तक 80 जिंदा तुसी भी जिंदा हो जब 80 मर गए तो फिर उनकी जिम्मेवारी साड़ी नहीं.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We are today officially halfway through our 16 days, which is kind of unbelievable. It feels like we started yesterday, but really we've been on so many journeys, a different one every evening, a different part of the country, a different perspective, a different subject altogether. You know, we've talked about family, we've talked about music, we've talked about architecture, we've talked about cities, we've talked about trade, and all of this wrapped up, we've talked about food, of course we've talked about food, and all of this wrapped up in just the most beautiful stories that all of our interviewees have shared with us. Yesterday we had Saz Agarwal with us, who gave us an incredible look at the Sindhi community and their history, which is obviously very unique because those of them who came to India entirely lost access to all of their homeland. And we just sort of scratched the surface in the hour. There's obviously a lot more, and I hope that some of you, felt encouraged to go out and read more about it, and perhaps through her book, which is a great look at it. And it was really fascinating. I, for one, had never really questioned, why is there a Sindhi community up on the Canary Islands, or why are there so many Sindhis in Hong Kong, or why are there Sindhis in Freetown? I had just sort of taken it as for fact, and so to learn the, more than a century-old history of exploration and curiosity and trade of that particular community was just very, very interesting. And again, there's two themes that have come up for us almost every night. And the first is the importance of oral history, that, for history that wasn't written down, there's only one way to record that history before the knowers of that knowledge are no longer with us. And the second is that it is upon those of us now to take responsibility of that custodianship. Oral history demands a sort of a personal responsibility to be taken because it's not present for us to access anywhere. So the only way for us to internalize it and learn it is to make the effort to go out and ask for it. And I just want to share one story. On the first night, we talked with Shubhra Chatterji, or History Valley, who many of you know. And Shubhra shared a beautiful story with us about her family. And some of you might have seen this on Instagram, but she shared with me after that opened a floodgate in her own family. Once she spoke, WhatsApp was alive, people were sharing photos, stories, and adding to her story pieces that she may or may not have known before. And now, as a family, they have come together to record their story in some way and have tasked her, I believe, with putting together a small, or not, maybe not a small, but putting together a series or a session for the younger members of their family who may, for whom partition is even further away. And so to make sure that they know their family history. And that I thought was just such a beautiful outcome of what it is we're doing here. And so I really encourage you that if you do have a family history that you've been curious about, whatever it may be, it need not be partition specifically, lean into that curiosity and go find out more about it. Our guest today has done just that, but at a scale that I think most of us won't achieve in our lifetime. Aanchal Malhotra is a writer, a historian, and a founder of the Museum of Material Memory, which is an incredible place virtually. And I would highly recommend that everybody check it out. And if you have something to submit, definitely submit it there. But what we're going to focus on today is her incredible book, Remnants of a Separation. I think, referred this book to every human I know. It was one of my absolute favorite reads when I read it. And it is the only book that I have finished and started again in the same instance. I've never done that before, but when I finished this book, I felt I haven't internalized this enough. I'm not done. And so I read it twice in one sitting. It is 19 stories from India and Pakistan, tracing the history of families through material heirlooms. Some are expected heirlooms, jewelry is an expected heirloom perhaps, and some are unexpected heirlooms. Some are heirlooms because of the meaning that had been infused at them, or how they had been created, or how they had been brought across. So many things make a thing valuable. And Aanchal has just done an incredible job of bringing that to light, of looking at the questions of how does a thing become valuable, or why does it become valuable? So yesterday, one thing I wanted to add, and Aanchal, this I'd noted to share with you as well before I finally introduce you and stop rambling on. Yesterday, one of the stories that Saaz Agarwal shared with us was the story of Mr. Kundani, a Sindhi gentleman who was the principal of the National College in Hyderabad, Pakistan. And when he left for India, the only thing he brought with him were 2 trunks full of books and lab equipment. And then he went on to set up the National College in Bombay with that exact equipment. And so when she said it, I said, oh, what a wonderful segue to our chat today and what we're going to be talking about. So finally, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I should just publicly state that Saaz Agarwal's book, Stories from a Vanished Homeland, is one of my key texts that I refer to while writing my Sindhi chapters. Because I think before her, there was so little that was known about why and how an entire community of Hindu Sindhis is pretty much dispersed across the world. So I would highly recommend her book to everyone, as well as Rita Kuthari's work, which is also on Sindhi identity, culture, and language.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And one of the things that we said yesterday was, it read like it started as a personal project and then grew into a community project. And I felt very similar. Sorry, go on.
No, exactly. I was just going to say, how else? It's not as if we are isolated beings. We can't. We are codependent. We are interconnected with people. So anything that we do will ultimately affect, if only the second person in our vicinity, but it will always affect other people and become some form of community. So I think that particularly with projects like this, that deal with culture, that deal with identity, that deal with community, it cannot be an isolated act. But on that note, though, oral history is an isolating craft. It is a very isolating craft, because when you're sitting with the person, you're recording them, and it's usually, I don't know about other people, but for me, it was almost always the person whose story I was writing and me. That's it. There was very rarely any other family member. Sometimes there were partners. But then after you've done that primary recording, you go back and you're only left with that recording, and it's just you and the voice now. And all you need to do is now listen to it, transcribe it, translate it, transliterate it, do secondary research, and that can last days or it can last months. But basically, at the end, it's just you and the voice.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. You've spoken to one of my questions. I'm just gonna dive right into that one. Your book, you know, every chapter, for those who haven't read it, every chapter is about an individual and a particular thing or set of things that was meaningful to them. And you just talked about, you know, when you're interviewing someone, it's often just you and them and maybe some members of the family. One of the things that we've talked about, you and I have briefly discussed this before, but also over the course of these days, is how so many people who went through partition just didn't talk about it for so many years. So can you maybe describe to us the experience of sometimes maybe hearing someone's story for the same time as people in their family?
Yeah, that's happened a lot actually. I don't know, I guess the question we need to ask ourselves first is, why did people not talk about partition? What are the reasons that they internalized it, silenced it, deliberately maybe forgot it in some cases, could never see their home again, could never see friends and school again? I guess there are many reasons, and now because so much time has passed, we are only just speculating, because anything you and I have is secondhand memory. But I don't think that the first generation who lived through partition could come to terms with what had happened, because they had to normalize it so quickly. Can you imagine, one day you were in your home and the next day you were either a stranger in that very same country, or you were in a completely different place you had never seen before and had to make that your home. So I don't think a lot of us can understand that kind of sudden uprootedness and normalization that happens quickly after. Because if you've come to a new place, you're likely staying in a government camp. If you're in a camp, you don't know when you're going to get food, you don't know where you are going to get a job from, you don't know how people are going to get educated in your family if you have children. You don't know what you're going to do. It's very disconcerting to not know these things. And I think that that sense of alarm was something that I recorded in a lot of people's narratives, that they simply did not know what they were going to do, and they relied a lot on literally anything they were able to get, whether it was working as a hawker, whether it was selling, anything. So any job they could get. And I think when survival is your prime duty, feeling always becomes secondhand. Like, you don't think about how it feels. You don't think about the kind of existential loss that you've just gone through. And I think because they had to, most of the people that migrated either to India or Pakistan had to work so hard to shed that label of refugee, that they really didn't talk about what it felt. Their vulnerabilities did not have any place in the national narrative or the narrative of rebuilding. And I mean, particularly, like, I come from a Punjabi family, and I know this is true for a lot of the Punjabi community, that the emphasis has always been on looking forward. What are you going to do next? What are you going to do tomorrow? Like, it's always like, how are you going to rebuild yourself? What about entrepreneurship? What about a business? It's always about looking forward. And to the fact that my own grandfather, didn't want to talk about partition because he said, why should we look at the past? It's not going to change. And he's right, it wouldn't have changed. But I think that these conversations were so essential to have had then, if there would have been any space for that. And I know, I don't want to generalize. I know some people had these conversations. I know some people talked about how it felt. And I know some people have been lucky enough to hear these stories from their family because they felt it important for the subsequent generations to know. But unfortunately, this has not been the norm. So when you're sitting in a room with someone, already you have to understand that you're in a position of great privilege, because someone has willingly opened up to you about probably the most vulnerable part of their life. And for that, you have to make sure that you are sincerely interested in that experience. I think that one of the greatest things, and I always say this, one of the greatest things that millennials need to learn to do is to listen to people. Because I particularly like stories of the past. They can really teach us about things that obviously we were not present to see, but also the cyclical nature of history. A lot of what I heard in terms of partition can be seen happening today, which means that there has not been enough conversation about things for subsequent generations to know some things were wrong. So when you're sitting with people and you're having these conversations, it is so intimate. And you can tell that sometimes they are saying things for the first time. And you know that if a child or a grandchild is sitting with you, they're hearing it for the first time, more than often, not always though. And I don't know, how does it feel? I always think about it. Is it, you feel like you're encroaching on a family conversation? Do you feel like because of you, these things are coming out? Do you feel like after this conversation, the person will be lighter? I don't know. I felt all of those things and more. But I know that in voicing what happened, we are at least having it recorded for posterity.
Yeah.
Someone saying something to me and me recording it, me making a note of it, me making other people read and know about it means that it is out there in the world. It is a fact, it happened to someone. You mentioned earlier on that we rely on the oral archive. Yes, we don't have official archives, particularly of this time. How could we? So many of our ancestors were not educated enough, and we were colonized. There are no records of ordinary people.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you a very small example, kind of unrelated from partition, but my great-great-grandfather was an inspector in the Imperial Police. And he had a role, like he was an inspector, something that a lot of Indians did not get in a police that was run by Englishmen. And despite that, I cannot find a single reference to him in any British archive. So imagine, he had a post as an inspector. Imagine the person who had no post, who was just a common person. Where is the lived archive from there? How will their subsequent generations ever find out anything about them? They won't. They won't, because there is no written archive, and that is what must change. Oral history is something that we need to focus strongly on, because it gives importance to ordinary people and the extraordinary stories of ordinary people. And I think in some ways with partition, it also gives onus to the experience that people felt, because when they voice it, they live it, they own it, right? It is going back into that time. It is saying that, yes, I felt this. And people always say, we are not Nehru, we are not Jinnah, we are not Gandhi, why do you want to record our stories? And they come up with this incredible story of resilience and survival and just, you know, traits that we can't even visualize, which obviously means that the human experience is incredible. No matter on what level, like even the stories of violence of partition, even the stories of friendship, they are all equal in terms of the archive. We must record everything and quickly. And now I've just been rambling on for so long. I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize at all. That's why we're here. No, and I think, you know, something you said, you know, home is sort of was thrust upon the refugees, and they worked hard to rid themselves of that tag. Oh, hello?
Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, awesome. They worked hard to rid themselves of that tag of being a refugee. Do you have? Can you share anything about either from your, you know, overall experience or a specific one about the feeling of a changing citizenship within that context, but realizing the permanence of your changed citizenship maybe not right in that moment? I don't know. What was that? Is there anything that you can share?
I don't know if this is the kind of example you're looking for, but I'll tell you something from my own family. My grandfather, who went on to start a very successful bookshop, his family had a lot of money troubles when they first moved, right? They came with nothing. And it's kind of incredible that they were able to build such a successful business from nothing. But no matter how many years had passed, my grandfather couldn't bear to pay 250 rupees for a cup of coffee outside in a restaurant. It would pain him. It would pain him that it was so expensive. And I don't know, I mean, maybe this is just me making a really big leap, But I don't think that experience of not having any money in your pocket ever left him and ever leaves anyone, because you've worked so hard to rise from that feeling. But no matter how successful he was, he would never spend so much money on a coffee and always come home and ask my grandmother to make it for him. So I think this is a very small thing, but it speaks to a much larger, I don't know, like drive, I guess.
Absolutely. I've heard you speak in some interviews about the guz and the ghada and the beginning of your journey to writing Remnants. Can you share that with everyone here?
Oh, of course. So I'm not a trained historian. I didn't go to school for English literature. I actually studied to be an artist. I'm a metal engraver by education. I make lithographs. I've made Japanese paper. This is what I studied. So everything, and this maybe allows people to understand why I'm so visual in my writing as well, because I focus on the sensorial, the synesthetic. So I was doing my MFA in a small university in Montreal, and I decided to take a sabbatical year and come home to India. And while I was here, I had to work on my master's thesis, but I remember having no ideas. And I at the time I was like, oh, if it comes, it'll come. I don't care. So I came to India hoping to be inspired. The most cliche thing, like I will find an idea. So I come to India and I stay with my parents in Delhi. And I have a friend, Mayank Austin Sufi. He goes by the alias the Delhi Wala. And he told me that he was writing a story on old houses in Delhi city. And my maternal family lives in a very old house in North Delhi. And can I show it to him? It was a house from the 50s. So I said, yeah, of course. And we make our way there in October 2013. Everything I know, like it is the beginning. And we're sitting in this house that is occupied by my mother's joint family. So 4 brothers, their wives, 3 brothers, one lives overseas, one's family lives overseas. Their wives, their children, everyone lives in this house. And so obviously there are a lot of things and a lot of history and a lot of memory. And my grandfather's oldest brother, he brings out all of these objects and he says that, you're talking about old things. Some of these things here are even older than us. And in particular, he is referring to the guz and the ghada that his family carried from Lahore to Amritsar. Now, their family lived in Chuna Mandi in the walled city of Lahore, and their grandfather owned a clothing shop. And at that clothing shop, their father used to work, and that's where he used the guz. For those of you who don't know what a guz is, it's a yardstick. So like people say, ek gaz kapda dena, like give me, it's the equivalent of a yard of fabric, essentially. Guz is also the unit of measurement as well as the thing to measure with.
Yeah.
It's like a stick. So he showed me this guz and he showed me the ghada in which their mother used to make lassi every Sunday, and she had received it as a part of her trousseau, her wedding trousseau. And it was very common for women to get bartan, all kinds of utensils when they went to their marital home. So when they came to Amritsar, they carried these 2 things. And when my grandfather's brother was talking about these 2 things, he was like transported. He was transported not just to his childhood, which we see happen so many times with people, but he was transported across a border that is so militarized and impenetrable. And immediately, like, it was as if he slipped through time and he was back in Lahore. And I think that was the first time that I realized the power that an object has to possess memory, to hold memory within it for years. And he was so moved by that. And he started talking about their migration. He started talking about partition, what they had seen. They were already in Delhi when partition happened finally. But the violence that they had seen, how it had affected their neighbors in Morigate. And I don't know, I think like so many things clicked that afternoon. the fact that I was a descendant of 4 refugees and I never paid attention to that fact, or the fact that I had studied it in school and never understood it to be my history, or the fact that it was such a big deal now. What was it about that moment? What was it about that interaction, that afternoon, the objects? What was it that just wouldn't leave my mind? And I thought about it for weeks, and I kept thinking about how if one person is so affected by things, mere things, are other people as affected? And what did people bring? We always hear these stories about people saying, we came in caravans, we came with nothing, we came in the middle of the night, we were in a train, ek baksa, ek suitcase. What did they bring in that ek baksa, ek suitcase? What is precious? I mean, you put it together very nicely at the beginning of our conversation. What is precious? What is valuable? And is value only calculated in the monetary sense? Right? So these, I mean, obviously now I have theorized this project enough to be asking these big questions. But at the beginning, I was a complete novice, and it was purely for the reason that I did not know anything. And if I did not know anything, what about generations that will come after me? How little will they know? And how will history be bastardized and used for all kinds of sinister ways in their lifetimes, as we see it being used in us? So I think at the beginning, and I think that's why it was really a project of curiosity, because I didn't know anything. As I said, I studied art. I could talk about the importance of a modern painting, but I couldn't talk about my own history. And it really got to me. So I decided to embark on this research project, and I decided to do it for my master's thesis, which I did. And then it just grew really quickly and exponentially, because such a project cannot be a private project. It's not just because it affects many people, it's also because you need people. I couldn't have done this on my own. If I am sitting in people's houses and asking them questions, then people are open, kind, and generous enough to share that information with me. We have entered into some sort of invisible, intimate contract, which allows us to go beyond the landscape we are sitting in at the moment and really understand the landscape of the past. And I can't stress on how much sincerity is required in this work and how much honesty is required in this work, because someone is trusting you and you have the responsibility to do justice to that experience that they have told you, even if you may not agree with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So can I ask then, as a student of the fine arts, I know this started initially as a photo project, you started doing it through the visual arts. What compelled you to write? Because as you're saying, people are trusting you to tell their story, but there's a lot more room to not change, but represent the story differently if you're putting it into words.
Yeah, so when I was going around, I mean, it just started in Delhi, and then it moved to Amritsar, and then all sorts of other cities, from Calcutta to the south, and I tried to record as many people as I could. But I don't know why I was recording, actually. This is a great question, because ideally I should have just been photographing the thing. But the stories of the things were just incredible. And I think the minute I understood that this project would be beyond a photo archive, my interviews became a lot more detailed as well. But at the beginning, it was really just recording about how people got the thing across, where they came from, how they felt, what had happened, what happened in the area that they were from, what happened in the area that they moved to. But my vision was just as a photo archive, because I knew that I was in a fine art program and I was going to exhibit these on a wall and people would visually, tap into this. But I defended the thesis, and then I was left with all of this content, this data, this conversations, voices. Just the voices refused to leave me. And I think that the largest impetus for starting to write them down was the fact that no history book was recording them. No history book would record the things that I had heard, would record the things that other oral historians were researching as well. as if as if people were independent from the historical experience.
Yeah.
As if people were just data, they were that number, and history did not happen to them, whereas in fact they had made up history, they were living history. So I think that the impetus to write was because no one would ever read this anywhere else. And this was something that I wanted to read. I wanted to know how people dressed, how people lived, what did they eat, how did they do their hair, what kind of conversations they had with their friends. These intimate parts of human history. It was an attempt to write a human history of partition. That's what Remnants was, because these were humans that were affected by it.
I think that's such a beautiful way of expressing it, and it's come to light in many ways. But the idea that people are more than data, and it is their experience that makes your history. So reducing them to a number is such a gross injustice, really.
But I have to say that it wasn't just the government that did that. It wasn't just statistics that did that. People in itself did not raise their voices.
Yeah.
So we can think about why the Jewish experience is so well known. Is because the Jewish community makes sure to record it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is the Holocaust archive? It is voices. It is voices of people, like the smallest of nuanced information about what they were wearing when they went in the camp, what they were wearing when they came out, what they ate, how they felt. Everything is recorded because that's what makes the lived archive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Like you were saying, you ask people their story and they say, why do you want my story? I wasn't Nehru or Jinnah. It's exactly that. It's extracting the importance of that. No, is there a story that was maybe to you surprising in a more like lighter sense of like, oh, this is something you chose to bring over the border? Like,
I'm really glad you asked that, because these conversations get very heavy. So actually, I wrote the book in 2000. It came out in 2017. You have the hardback, I see. After that, a year after that, paperback came out, which had extra chapters. And the reason was that, after the book came out, I kept recording stories, because how can you stop?
Right.
And one of the stories I recorded was in Lahore, and it was the most bizarre object I had ever heard of. It was a 15.5-foot crocodile carcass that someone carried from Bharowal on the banks of River Byas in India to Lahore. And the story just I remember being in Lahore in February 2018, and the family that I had already interviewed, it was Sitara Fyaz Ali's family.
Okay.
And when I went to meet them for lunch, she had called her whole family. So one side of the family just very casually mentioned कि हमारे ना crocodile मगरमच्छ का सर है. And I was like, what do you mean मगरमच्छ का सर है? तो फिर उन्होंने कहानी बताई that on the banks of River Byas before partition, sometime in the 1930s, there was a crocodile, very large, 15.5 feet, that would eat washermen, dhobis. Those are the only people that come to the river. So anyway, he had eaten 2 or 3. And then this gentleman, Sitara Fyaz Ali's ancestor, made it a point to catch this crocodile. And it took him many weeks, but he caught him. And they asked for 2 bullock carts to come from the village to carry the crocodile. That's how large he was. And once in the village, they set the crocodile down for a viewing. Everyone in the village saw that the crocodile had died. The families of the dhobis were avenged. Children touched it. And again, these are stories that they have heard from their ancestors. So it's so chatpata, it's so fascinating. कि उन्होंने ये कहा था और ऐसे हुआ था, नहीं ऐसे हुआ था, याद नहीं, इतना बड़ा था, these stories are just so amazing. So then because this man has killed this huge beast, he taxidermies it. And as people hang, lion heads and tiger heads in their house, he hangs his crocodile head. And the skin is rolled up, it's embalmed, it's preserved. So roll karke side pe rakha tha. And when partition happens, it is obviously one of the most precious things that he has. So he carries it with him to Lahore. And now it is in it's like very high up on the wall in one of their houses, but I got to see it. I touched its teeth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just thought it was like fantastic, you know, like here I am recording all of this intense violence and intense sadness. And this person in Lahore is like, hum to magarmach laye the ji. You know, so you're like, tell me more.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. I love that
It
story.
was like, it was just amazing. And to think that I had spent so much time with that family, you know, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And this little comical thing never came up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really so interesting. And I guess that this is something you've touched on before as well, but that also indicates to us sort of the socioeconomic class of the people coming across, right? Like to have the luxury to be able to transport something like that means there was some planning allowed or involved or whatever it was.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that what people brought, you know, the thing is that sometimes people see a study of objects and they think that it is only a study of objects because these things are things. And I don't know, it seems really reductive to do that, because a study of objects will actually tell you about socio-economic class, kind of society people lived in, whether they knew partition was going to happen, whether they were completely unprepared, whether they had packed, and what they considered valuable and what they did when they got to the other side with that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you were doing your interviews, did you see quite a cross-section?
I tried to interview across the board in terms of gender, in terms of caste, in terms of nationality, in terms of different ethnicities within religion. But I still think that the study has, it can be expanded in so many ways. I know the shortcomings of the project. I know it already. The fact that someone can get something means that even if that thing is, you know, a kade ka glass or a plate, it already means that they were able to get something. I know that. And I know that this is a drawback that a lot of people have said, that it's about a particular kind of class. But I would argue that, you know, everyone got like things like plates or something small, or if it's idols. So I feel like I tried, and I continually try to make that effort for diversity. But I do know in terms of geographic area and the kind of narratives, there is still a long way to go. So the project is not closed yet by any means.
And you were just talking about the family in Lahore, and I know you've spent quite a bit of time there over the course of your research. Can you talk to us a little about how that feels? You've mentioned before the feeling of belonging somewhere you've never been. And so as someone who's grown up in Delhi, what did Lahore feel like to you?
Lahore feels like Delhi only. Lahore and Delhi are built as twin cities, both by the Mughals and by the British. And I think that if someone from Delhi goes there, there's definitely going to be a lot of similarity you see in terms of how you feel when you're there, in terms of how the roads feel, in terms of how the structures are. Similarly, for someone from Bombay, when they go to Karachi, it will feel very similar, as I felt having been in Karachi and also having visited Bombay. But the thing is, when you go someplace with a very open heart and a very open mind, and hope that that city will give you what you want, then that city will embrace you. If I had gone to Lahore, or if I had gone to Karachi or Islamabad with a closed mind and with fear and a preconceived notion of what I may find there, then I would never have the experience that I had. But because I had recorded so many interviews where if someone wasn't from Lahore, they definitely mentioned it, because Lahore was like the educational capital, it was the cultural capital, it was the economic capital. And someone would always mention Lahore and have some connection to it. So I thought that I had, like, you know something from afar. You know it well from afar. You know it intimately from afar. And when I went there, I really felt like it was the Lahore that people were talking about, even though Lahore had changed so much, like Delhi has, and grown exponentially. But because I went with such a desire to know more, and because I wasn't, it's kind of amazing that I wasn't afraid. but it was curiosity. I needed to know where my family came from. I needed to know what that felt like, how people were like there, what did they eat, what would I find out, what would they tell me, how would they receive me. It was just excitement, I think. I think that the minute I got off the plane in Lahore, it just felt like ये तो जानी पहचानी city है, मतलब ये शहर हमारा शहर हो सकता है. It was like that.
Yeah.
But the interviews there, in terms of the interviews, despite how welcoming and warm and open-hearted people are with the things they tell you, partition means something totally different for Pakistan. Right? It is the creation of statehood, literally. So all your narratives are seen from a totally different perspective. And I think that was the other thing that was so important to record, and why maybe Remnants is different than other partition books, in that it is able to physically go to the other side and show people what that is like, if only to dispel myths about the other side. I think that the fact that I had access to the other side made me believe that I had the responsibility to do justice to that side. Right? And I think that on both sides, I mean, Indian and Pakistani media both do this, that we are shown a kind of, half truth, half fabricated, I don't know. We are shown the narrative of the government.
Yeah.
We are shown a political narrative. On the ground, governments may be different, yes, but on the ground, in terms of people, in terms of the human relationship, the individual experience, the conversation, it is no different. And this is what I always say to people, that if a Pakistani meets you on the road, you won't even know that they're a Pakistani, because of how similar we look, because of how similar we feel, how we talk, what we eat.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I was sharing actually one of the first days I didn't grow up in India. I was saying that my best friend growing up was Pakistani, and Pakistan only became really far away when I was in India. When I wasn't in India, it was just like us, because it was looking for that familiarity in an otherwise foreign place. No, absolutely. And I just actually, just talking about what partition meant for Pakistan and how it was completely different for what it meant for India. When Sumayya Usmani was on, she used the term, she said, I see myself as a first generation Pakistani. And I'd never thought of it in that way.
Second generation after partition? Yeah, right.
Yeah, so she's first generation born in Pakistan. And I'd never thought of it in that way. And so I'm wondering if in your interviews, this sense of, yes, was there a sense of, and maybe you can't speak generally, so it can be an example, or general if it applies, we loved our home, but this is something that we needed to establish.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think that for those of you who really, I may not be able to verbalize this as well as I have thought about it, but read Nazir Adhani's chapter, because this is exactly what he talks about. It's exactly what he talks about, the fact that India was his home, and every single member of his family remained in India. He was the only one that went to Pakistan. Everyone remained here, the dead and the living. But Pakistan was his dream, and he needed to accomplish that. It was an ideal. India was home, but Pakistan was what they had fought for. So I think that you can, and it was very complicated for me then to understand, because I recorded this interview in 2014. I was very young. It was very complicated for me to understand that one can have the duality, also think of something as their home, but still feel very patriotic towards the home that you have adopted. It's very complex. And like I said, I'm really not voicing this well enough right now, but he says it very well, because Pakistan was his dream. And he did achieve that, but I remember he said to me, "Par apni mitti koi bhool sakta hai? Can anyone forget the soil that they were born on?" And when he said that, in my mind, it was like, wait, what? I really didn't understand it. It took me a long time to understand that you can be both. You can be emotional for something that you have voluntarily left, while being patriotic for something that you have voluntarily chosen.
Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine, by the way.
Yeah.
He's really wonderful. And this is the other thing, like I always keep in touch with people that I interview. Not only him, like his granddaughter, his son, his daughter-in-law. We speak on WhatsApp. He calls me Beti. I wish we talk on the weekend. It's really important to keep up these relationships that anyone has forged, across the border, because honestly, this is a hope for the future. With how contentious the relationship is between the politics of India and Pakistan, the only hope we have for future generations, or the trait that I would like to see future generations instill in them, is empathy. That's it. That's the hope. Empathy.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the more we humanize, and the more we're able to empathize, and the more we empathize, the less we hate. Yeah.
Easier said than done.
One would hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to shift gears slightly to this. We've obviously been talking a lot about identity, but very specifically when it comes to markers of identity. You have a ration card or a license or a passport, whatever it is, or a certificate of graduation, some sort of marker of identity. Was there a general sense that these remained important documents after partition?
I think that if people were able to get across certificates or documents, then yes, they remained important. And what are the reasons why they took these documents? One is, of course, if you hope to get higher education. So you take your matriculation certificates, and some people, because partition happened in August and final exams were in like March or April, some people weren't able to get the metric certificates after giving the exam because they had migrated. So there are also stories of people that sent metric certificates to them across the border. But I think that if people were able to get them, then they were pretty precious for them. So they would carry things, documentation for work. For example, there is a story of someone that has carried a certificate of employment from the Northwestern Rails as a train clerk at the Carnival station. And he does this because he hopes that he will get a job in the Indian Railways as well, which he does. There are all kinds of passports, yes, of course, but then they would, if you had a passport at the time, it would have been the British Indian passport, which was nullified after partition. Some people had an India-Pakistan passport, which was used for lateral movement between India and Pakistan only in the years following partition. In the years following the 71 war, some people had an India-Bangladesh passport as well, discontinued in 2013. So I think the documents, again, like the document is privilege. Like it means that you have a job, it means that you know where these things are. And again, like the documents continue to be contested spaces till today. But I have personally recorded many stories of documents, and also people's refugee certificate that they got made in either India or Pakistan was equally as important for them, because it was literally about, now you are an Indian citizen, now you're a Pakistani citizen, and this is your identification, your number, you are from this camp, you came from here, this is your father's name, this is your thumbprint, this is how it was. Yeah.
Before I sort of move on, I can see lots of activity in the comments, but I haven't looked at it yet. But before I move on to that, I was wondering if there was maybe one story that in the next few minutes you might summarize and tell us special parts of, or tell us a little bit of, and any one of the stories of the many you have.
So you were talking about earlier about whether people were saying things for the first time in front of children and grandchildren. And there is a story in Remnants about the Punjabi poet Prabjot Kaur. And Prabjot Kaur is really well known. Like, I don't know how there is not more written on her. She lived such an incredible life. She was such an important poet, such a widely translated poet. But nonetheless, I met her in 2013 and I recorded her story. And then I started writing, and over the years, there were things that I collected from regional language sources. There were things that I connected from other interviews that she had given. And then I visited her again in 2015. And she had aged, like, her health was not good. She had aged considerably, and it was visible as well. And I was in her house with her daughter. And there were certain things that I didn't understand about her story, like their actual journey of migration to Kalyan near Bombay. They traveled from Badami Bagh, which is a small suburb of Lahore, to Kalyan. And there were certain things that weren't clear in that first recording. So I asked her again. And at this point now, why I'm saying this is so important is that she couldn't speak anymore. She really, she would mumble, and there were very few people that would understand her. And her daughter was one of them, obviously, because she lived with her. So she sat in on our conversation, which she hadn't done before. Like, she would come in through parts, but she didn't sit in the full thing. And in this second interview, Nirupama was sitting with us, and her mother was speaking, and she would kind of translate or speak louder for her. So, as it would turn out, that when they left Badami Bagh for Lahore, a truck came to pick them up in the middle of the night, and her mother had told all the siblings to dress in black chadars. Chadar is just a shawl, which is the word that they would use. It's a big black shawl. So, and remember, she's a poet. So her details are so visceral. So she remembers cooking roti on the chula, and the truck came and they all left, and the chula was still with the roti and it was burning. And she reaches the station and says, "Oh, roti jal gayi." Then she says that we were all dressed in black chadars, like we were thieves, like we were slinking out like thieves from our own home. What kind of a flight is that? Then they get to the station, and she notes that it is very quiet, and she thinks that we are safe because there are no riots, there are no mobs, we are safe. And then they get on the train, and the train is also quiet, completely quiet. And the reason for that is that every single person who had arrived from the other side in that train has been murdered and is lying there dead and butchered and cut up pieces. And the descriptions, she talks about the stray hair, she talks about the suitcase, she talks about the pools of blood. Nirupama has never heard these details before. She confirms with her mother, "Are you sure?" She says, "Yes, of course I'm sure." And she goes on to describe how when they finally moved, they had to sit on top of the dead and butchered bodies and make their way to the other side. And so much blood there was everywhere that her black chadar could still show a pool of blood as it seeped into it. You know, like when, even with dark fabric, if something seeps into it like blood, thick like blood, you see it. So she remembers these details. And I, of course, am at one hand kind of horrified by the exceptional detail in her memory, but at the same time, these are stories that I hear now on an everyday basis. So they don't affect me as much. But for Nirupama, this is the first time she has heard something that is so intimate to her, which is her family history. So the fact that she doesn't know really shocks her. And the fact that the mother lives with her and they obviously have a great relationship. So she's visibly struck by this. And I asked her that, "Did you not know?" And Nirupama says, "I didn't know at all." And Prabjot Kaur says, "There was never a need to say it. There was never a need to talk about it. What is the need? When does the need come in? Who brings the need?" I think these are really pertinent questions that must be anchored by the third generation only. We have time, we have distance, we obviously have access to information and knowledge. We should be asking these questions. We are the need. The need is for us and our subsequent generations. And that interview just really shook me. How you can have a 3-hour-long interview with someone and they can omit such a disastrous detail and bring it back because now there's need.
Wow.
Yeah, there's not much to say after that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
it was not my story to share, it was her story to share, and I am grateful for her. She passed away in 2018, and I am so grateful that she trusted me with the story, and I was able to share it with people who have read the story and been affected by it in that way.
Absolutely. And Yeah, I don't think I can say anything to that. I've had goosebumps the whole time that you've been speaking just now, and I think I'm sure many people are sort of feeling that way. Just while I start to maybe look at some of the questions, just oh wow, that thought that like there was never any need to say it is just ringing in my head. That we the like you're saying that it's not just it's the need, but it's also the space has to be created to bring those to the surface,
Exactly.
to unpack it. If
So
anything else.
many people. I remember Faiz Ravani in Lahore. I asked him a question that I thought had hit too close, because he just looked out the window and he started crying. And the question was simple. The question was, when you were migrating from Jalandhar to Lahore, from Jalandhar to Lialpur and then Lahore, were you not scared? That was my question. My question was so simple because he was young. He was 17.
Right.
And he just started crying, and I said, "My God, Aanchal, you have just done it now. He's not going to answer anything else." And he looked out the window and he was like quiet for several seconds, and then he said, "If you don't ask, who's going to ask?" Professor Satpal Kohli said the same thing. Who's going to ask? John Gregor Taylor gave me cigarette cards that he had collected as a child, with the battalions of the Indian regiments on them, because no one in his family wanted them, because who else would preserve them? Like this question, who else? Who else will ask? Who else will need to know? Yeah. You are the who else. The third generation needs to own this narrative and put together a shared history from the countries that it affected, because that's so essential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just want to share with you that so many people are sharing their stories through the comments.
Great. If I could just ask people, if anyone ever wants to email me the story, please, that's the best way to get in touch with me. If you want me to come and interview your family, I still do that as well. If you have objects from partition, that is the cherry on the cake. So please write to me in any form.
Yes, please do. I think that's how we do this. Someone's asking, do you have any stories that you might share from the east of India?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I haven't been to Bangladesh, something I regret deeply. But I do want to go. That being said, I have spent a long time in Calcutta interviewing people that did come from that side. One of the stories that has moved me the most, it's a story about many intangibles, but it really has moved me. I think about it all the time. It's a very romantic story as well, but not in the way that everyone is already thinking. So I interviewed a man in Bangalore who had come from Barisal in what is now Bangladesh, and they had come to West Bengal, and he recalled when he was coming that there is a term, udbastu, in Bangla, without bastu, without home. It's a very old term that every time I use it in front of any Bengali speaker, they're very shocked that I know it. So he said that when we were pulling into the station in Calcutta, we saw the udbastu. And they were living in large cement pipes near the train station. There were people waiting in the shadows of partition because they came just before partition. There were people waiting in the shadows of partition. So this has really stayed with me. But what else he said like really got to me was when he was young in Barisal, he had a neighbor who had geese, lots of geese, ducks, geese. Mm-hmm. And he had an older brother, Sunilda. He always says Sunilda. Yeah. And he came from a family of 11 brothers and sisters, 11 or 13. They were very large. Yeah. And they were all very close, apparently. So now everyone comes to Calcutta. Sunilda goes to Presidency College. And many years after partition, Sunilda goes back to Barisal to see their house. And this house with the geese was owned by Sunilda's friend's parents. The friend is Jahangir, and he also has a sister. The sister never would come out. She was always in Parda. But obviously, She knew who Sunil Da was. She knew his voice. She knew that they were friends. वो अंदर ही अंदर से ना, she knew everything. So this is significant number of years after partition. Sunil Da goes back to Barishar and he goes to see the house. And then across the house ना वो geese वाला घर अभी भी है. So very innocently he calls out, Jahangir, are you there? And a female voice says, Sunil Da, is that you? It was Jahangir's sister. She was still living in the house. She remembered his voice. I think like decades had passed. Like, it's giving me goosebumps as I'm telling you, you know. But it really like gets to me, the visceral nature of memory. She obviously had a soft spot for him. She obviously liked him. And she obviously never voiced that. Yeah. But if this doesn't speak magnitudes of someone's affection, then I don't know. I don't know what does. It really like it fills me with abundant like feeling every time I think about it.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a movie. It's like a scene from a movie.
Yeah, right. But on the, because the question is about the eastern side, I have to say that the eastern side and the migrations on the eastern side are a lot more porous than they are on the western side, and they continue to happen till date. And people have, you know, a lot of ties to the other side. To Bengal still, a very meaningful, important ties. Going to Bangladesh is something that's on my list because I know that a whole other world of stories will be unpacked. But if you want to read oral histories from that side, I would recommend Anam Zakaria's 1971. I think it came out last year. She is a fantastic oral historian from Pakistan. She's written on Partition, 1971, and also Kashmir from the Pakistani side.
Okay, thank you for that recommendation. That's really helpful. Yeah, no, absolutely. Even when we were talking about music, actually, when we were talking about classical music, Punjabi classical music had, you know, it had a sort of settling of the dust, but then largely after about 10 years, it seems like it sort of settled in one nation or the other, whereas Bengal, the border still remains very porous when it comes to the arts, and there's a lot of exchange that continues to happen more naturally. So yeah, that does seem to resonate. The last question I'll ask you that somebody has asked is, you mentioned that when you went to Lahore, you know, you received a lot of warmth, a lot of this feeling of nostalgia and coming home. And somebody asked that when Pakistanis come to Delhi, do you think Delhi gives them that same sort of reception? Or when Lahoris come to Delhi, does Delhi give them that same sort of reception?
I think that if the person is asking the question, they already know the answer. No, I mean, I think, no, I don't know. I can't speak for someone else's experience.
Yeah.
But what I said earlier will definitely hold true. The thing is that I think that Pakistanis are more used to seeing Indians in Pakistan because there are several divided families, Muslim families that continue to exist between India and Pakistan. So seeing an Indian in Pakistan is not that uncommon.
Right.
It's definitely like, it's definitely a novelty and people definitely want to speak to you, but it's not that uncommon. And honestly, you just blend into the landscape as well. Mm-hmm. But I have wondered what it is like if you happen to chance upon someone here in a cafe and you're like, oh, where are you from? And they say Pakistan. What would you say? I don't know. This is something I think about a lot because my reaction may not be the same as a lot of other people's.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if you happen to be in the audience and are somebody from Pakistan who has visited India, please do share with us your experience. I think we would be very curious to know what that reception was like.
What happens in the international space as well? Like when people go overseas, they go to college, they live in cities in America and the UK and Canada, and they come across someone speaking their own language.
Yeah.
And you're like, to see India, no. And you're like, nahin, main to Pakistani hu. And still there's like, acha, hamari, you know, hamari zuban type of thing.
Yeah.
No. Wahan pe jo ghar pe nahi ho sakta.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's, and it does, right? As soon as you're somewhere where there is a more foreign, then all of a sudden you realize, oh, actually, this is not a foreign. It's you know.
Yeah, you seem to have less ownership over the fortified boundaries that you keep at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with this evening?
Final thoughts. I don't know. I thought that once Remnants is published, I may feel lighter, but this feeling of heaviness doesn't go away. And you know, this sense that you have a moral responsibility to interview someone if they tell you, like, no matter what the year has been, if someone tells me a story, I always write it down. And sometimes I wish that I wasn't, sometimes I wish I didn't have to, because it's so heavy. And like, imagine you have hundreds of stories in your mind, and you have to go about your day as if they don't impact you, but they do every day. And you're young, like I'm young, and this is so heavy, and I'm forever changed by it. But despite all of that, I will say that I wouldn't give it up for anything, because I know that after I am gone, and all of us who do this work are gone, this work is what will stand the test of time. It will better relationships between our country. For me, the greatest joy is seeing someone from India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Bangladesh talk, find things on the other side. I don't know. I just think that the work is so much more important. And despite how heavy it is, that's why you do it. This is a very depressing final thought to leave people with. So I will say this. If you've bought the book and you enjoy the book, thank you so much. If you haven't bought the book but are a little bit curious about it, you should read it. If you have stories, then please send me an email. My email is easily available online on my website. I would love to hear from you. And despite the heaviness, I would love to record your story, because it's not just recording the story for the sake of recording. It is also for the sake of studying human memory, for understanding intergenerational relationships, for understanding the impact of traumatic experience on subsequent generations. I don't record. I'm not an archive. I don't record for the sake of recording. I really understand. I try to understand what the person has gone through and how it impacts our nation's history. That is it's a better thought to leave it at. But really, I mean, the thing is that the fact that the book was so well received, for me to be on panels like this is already, I don't know, it means that there is a need for this kind of information.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aanchal. Everyone watching, I mean, if that's not a call to action, I don't know what is. You know, if you have anybody that you know, they may be in your family, they may not be, they may be a neighbor, it may be a friend's grandparent that you know holds a piece of history within them that needs to be written down, recorded, heard, just heard. Even if you just listen to their story and you know, you're not compelled to send it, that's fine too. But let's create the space for these they're not, I mean, they are stories, but let's create the space for this history and bring it to the surface. And you know, that's what we're all trying to do, in some bigger ways than others and more permanent ways, or in others just, you know?
No, don't say bigger way and look at me, because I was 23 when I started. And trust me, I did not. The only reason why Remnants has become as big as it is because of people who have supported it, people like you, people who tell me stories. That's it. It is as much other people's project as it is mine, and I will be the first person to say that.
Well, I hope to say that, but this is an extraordinary book, and I would highly encourage everybody to read it if you haven't already. And if you have, then reread it and find a favorite story, because they are all so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And tomorrow we are shifting gears once again, and for the next 2 days we are exploring 2 major Indian cities and how the food of those cities has changed after partition. So tomorrow we'll be looking at Calcutta after partition with Nilanjana Guha, and then the day after that we will be looking at Delhi, which I'm sure many of you also know changed significantly after partition. So do come back, do join us tomorrow. Thank you so much, and good night.
Good night.